Since retiring from a successful and reputable VFL career in 2012, including 142 games for the Casey Scorpions and a year as the captain, Nigel Carmody has transitioned to a job behind the microphone, taking on roles such as the VFL, the AFLW, and regularly contributing at SEN. He has made a name for himself as an entertaining commentator. He also launched Collingwood and Richmond VFL radios, whilst managing many AFL players in the TLA worldwide industry. Today, he has kindly given me some time to ask him a few questions that are a mix of entertainment, comedy, and his overall career. Nigel, how would you describe your journey?
Thanks, Dylan. Nice to be with you. How would I describe my journey? A privileged one, I think, is probably the best way to describe it. From someone who grew up playing footy and watching all sorts of sports on television to now, I think I've been able to make a living out of that for the last 18 to 20 years is something that is a real privilege and something I'm looking forward to continuing to doing as well.
So we'll rewind to where you began your career in the industry. What was your first job for broadcasting, that is, and journalism?
Okay, so not 2 weeks of filling in for a mate at a butcher cleaning when I was 14. My first role in the media was I did do some work with volunteer work as it was at the time with Casey Radio, which was 3SER back then, which at the time was based at just near the Fountain Gate Shopping Centre, but now they're down near the Casey Arc Centre. So did a little bit of work while I was playing in the VFL, doing special comments on their radio coverage on days when we weren't playing. And then myself and my best mate got the opportunity to host our own breakfast show on the station 2 mornings a week, which we did in 2001 till 2003. And that was a pretty good time where we were our own, we were the on-air talent, we were the producers, we were the directors, we were the audio engineers, we were everything. But it was a pretty phenomenal time, and we had a lot of fun doing it and learnt a lot. And then, as you touched on, I've been lucky enough to work for TLA in the AFL player management space for the last 17 and a half years, which I've really enjoyed. And that has also, I guess, allowed me to build some relationships in the media as well, which I've been able to, turn into, I guess, another career.
Yeah. Was that radio the same one as the Casey, or was it a little bit different?
No, same one, 97.7 FM as it was then, and it still is now. So, yeah, as I said, it was originally just Sundays doing special comments, and then started having a crack doing play-by-play commentary as well. So in 2007, which was my last season at the Casey Scorpions as they were then, we got knocked out in the first week of finals, and 3 weeks later I was calling Geelong and Coburg in the grand final. So yeah, they were incredibly supportive and provided me with a lot of great opportunities, which if I didn't have those, I wouldn't be where I am today. But community radio and community newspapers, for that matter, as well, that's the breeding ground where a lot of really talented people cut their teeth. And Anthony Hudson tells a lot of stories about, calling Bendigo Football League games on community radio on Bendigo when he was a teenager, and you look where he's sort of gravitated to now. And Bruce McAvaney got his start calling harness racing trials on a Sunday morning in Adelaide. So, yeah, for people that end up in pretty amazing roles and in really prominent positions, you've got to start somewhere, and usually it's best to start with as small an audience as possible.
Yeah. At what age did you realise that your end goal was commentating and broadcasting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think there was ever a light bulb moment, so to speak. It was always something I'd had interest in, but also knew how few roles existed in that industry and how volatile it is as well. And you see, particularly over the last few months, as a result of COVID, but also media businesses as a whole were in a pretty perilous state prior to COVID anyway, that Fox Sports and places like that have had to cut a lot of really talented people this year. So there wasn't probably a moment where I said, this is exactly what I want to do. I think it's something that's evolved over time. But again, having been thrown some opportunities at different times, and probably one of the really key moments, I think, is when Channel 7 got the VFL rights at the end of 2014. They had to put a commentary team together, and I was lucky enough to I guess be given an opportunity to at least throw my hat in the ring for that, and then be given that opportunity. And if that hadn't have happened, then I'm probably not calling AFL Women's. I'm probably not calling AFL, and I probably haven't had a lot of the other opportunities I've had within the Seven network as well. So yeah, I wouldn't say there's one specific moment where I said that's what I wanted to do, but I think as more opportunities have come my way and people have said, "Hey, you're doing a good job, keep going," that's probably been something that's emboldened me to keep having a crack.
And was there anyone you idolised growing up, or was it something you just transitioned into and you realised that was your end goal, really?
Yeah, I think everyone's got their favourites, whether they're the players or the commentators. And I mean, from a footballing point of view, Wayne Carey was clearly my idol growing up. I was a North Melbourne supporter, and then in a more broader sporting sense, it was people like Shane Warne and Michael Jordan who were the superstars of my teenage years. In terms of commentators, I don't think I would say I idolised anyone, but I certainly listened to and consumed a lot at that time. And Bruce, who I touched on before, is probably one who back in the 1990s, it's not dissimilar to what he's doing today. He was calling footy, he was calling or covering horse racing, he was doing the Olympics. He was a bit of a jack of all trades, but also someone who was really passionate about it. So, Saturday afternoons for me, it was a different time with the AFL when there used to be 6 games effectively all running concurrently at 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon. It was natural to sort of do the rounds of the dial and listen to the ABC and 3AW and then Triple M when they came in a little bit later on, and you probably took little bits from each of the guys that were doing those.
And were you able to work with Bruce, because obviously your role in Channel 7?
We haven't worked on air together, but I've had a lot of conversations with him, many of which he's actually instigated, and he's pretty amazing in terms of the time he gives. Like he's a god in this country when it comes to sports broadcasting. And when he's someone sending you text messages or giving you a call before a race meeting or a game of footy to say good luck or well done on the other end of it, it certainly means a lot as well. Hopefully there'll come a time where we might be in the commentary box together doing an AFL game at some point. That'd be a real buzz.
Yeah. How were you able to get your foot in the door and commentate for the bigger leagues?
As I touched on before, I think 2014 was probably a pretty pivotal moment. I'd been calling VFL on SEN and on their sort of associated digital channels for a few years. And then, as I said, the rights moved from the ABC to Channel 7 for the first time, and they needed to put a commentary team together, and that was an opportunity. Again, lucky enough that I've been already working in that space, so I had a foothold, I guess, in terms of knowing the competition and understanding the players, and certainly doesn't hurt having had a pedigree in the league as a player as well, which meant you've got some sort of record to, I guess, refer to when you either talking about players or coaches or clubs, and being able to refer to history as well, and also relationships, which is really important. So I think that was a really important time. And as I said, you could never have envisaged that 2 years later would be calling the AFL women's competition, which at that time was really just it was a concept in 2015. And then when it came to reality in 2017, I don't think any of us really knew what we were going to be in for. So yeah, it's been a pretty remarkable thing to see how that's unfolded. And perhaps the other part of my journey that I think I've been really lucky with was I spent a lot of time on SEN, and particularly doing a lot of work with Mark Fine, who used to host the evening show. And that started out originally talking VFL. And then again, he was someone who said, "Hey, I think you can do more for this show than just VFL." So that gave me a platform to talk about AFL, and then a platform to talk about racing, platform to talk about cricket and other sports. And I think over time people go, okay, this guy understands not just his sort of core sport, he understands sport broadly, which is it's absolutely my passion to be able to flip between different sports. So I think, SEM was a pretty pivotal part of my journey as well. and particularly in the sense of that was really the platform I had a chance to talk about racing. And then now the work I'm able to do with racing.com, I certainly think, again, without the SEN experience, I probably don't have the runs on the board or the credibility to be given an opportunity to do the things I'm doing with racing.com.
Yeah. And when you're commentating in the box, do you have a favorite style, as in, say, binoculars or natural viewing or even off the monitor?
It's probably a combination of all three, but binoculars, there's no substitute for it because you have complete control over what you're seeing. And also it gives you the ability to get as far into the contest as possible. So you think about it, if you're at the footy sitting at the MCG or Marvel, not that we've had a chance to really do it this year, but cast your memory back. If the play's on the other side of the ground, how much you can actually see the detail of what's going on. And that's really what binoculars I find provides, is if there is a scrimmage of players, in a contest, 6 or 7 players in a pack, you're trying to really get in and see what's happening inside that contest and try and ideally be almost a second or two ahead of what's going to unfold. You can't completely predict it because you'd be guessing, but you need to sort of be able to have your brain thinking about what's the possibility here, what might be about to unfold, so you can then react accordingly. So I rely pretty heavily on binoculars, but yeah, clearly if the play is closer to you, then there's no substitute for your own eyes. And then from a monitor perspective, we normally have a couple of monitors in front of us. We might have one that's just completely locked off on what the viewer at home seeing. So the camera angles will change as is deemed by the director, which sometimes is good. But then if you're in the midst of calling off that and then the picture changes, you maybe lose your angles as well. So that's more of a reference point. If you're then, say, commentating, play stopped, the player's taken a mark and he's going to go back for a shot on goal, the replay might be running. So clearly you want to be able to talk to the pictures. And then the other monitor might have it might have a full ground view, but it's just a static shot, which you can sometimes rely on as well. So it'd probably use a combination of all three, but it's probably at least 50%, if not more, with the binoculars.
Yeah, okay. So TV and radio both have their pros and cons, and I know you've had experience with them both. Which style, again, do you prefer?
I love them both equally. Radio, there's a complete reliance on you to provide a picture in the person's mind's eye of what's going on, and how detailed and elaborate you can paint that picture is going to dictate how that person, whether they're sitting at home or they're driving in their car, is going to be able to understand what's happening and how you can convey the action that's taking place. And that's really important. And I know a lot of times I've synced up the television and the radio and mute the television just to see how the radio commentators go about painting that picture. And sometimes they do a really vivid job of it, and sometimes I think they maybe leave a little bit on the table. So you try and use that as much as possible to be a guiding principle in what you're doing. And radio radio's been around longer than television, so it is the more traditional of the mediums. And TV's different. I mean, you go out or you sit at home and mute the television, 80%, if not more, of what the viewer needs is already there for them. It's the picture's the king. So we're just there to try and provide a soundtrack, and hopefully, I think it's almost like you're the person sitting alongside the viewer at home on the couch. You might have some valuable information that you can convey to them in terms of a player's background or how their season's unfolded so far. Or in our role as commentators, we're not the experts. That's the job of Luke Hodge and Campbell Brown and those sorts of people. So to ask the right questions almost on behalf of the viewer to then get their expertise and their understanding of the game of what's happening and why. We're there to describe the play and tell you who's got the ball and what they're doing with it, but those guys can get to the nitty gritty of the how and why. And I think the best commentary teams link together on that, okay, the commentator's there to describe the action and talk to the pictures, but then the expert's got to be the person who adds that extra layer of expertise and potentially, particularly with footy and depending on camera shots, there might be things that happen 100 metres off the ball that the viewer hasn't seen, that they need to be able to, work with directors to provide different camera shots to then go, hey, we just saw why, Ben Brown's having a shot on goal, but actually if you go back to this piece of play in the back pocket, this is actually why that goal has come about. They're the best guys who are doing that.
And what is your approach towards a game or even a season? Do you find yourself researching players every night and finding fun facts about it, just so you can fill in those areas where it's bland, I guess?
Yeah, if you didn't enjoy that part of the job, I don't think you could do it. You just simply can't turn up on game day and pull out the footy record or get a team list and start calling, because you've only done probably a third of your job, and that is a significant amount of time. I'll probably spend anywhere between 3 and 6 hours on a game when it comes to prepping. I've got a sort of commentary board that I use, which is basically an A3 Excel spreadsheet that has one team on one side, one team on the other side, all their statistics in terms of games and goals over both the season and then in their career, and areas to obviously marking goals as they happen through the game, but then pretty much a Facebook status on each player that might have some football things in terms of, hey, this guy's been a 2-time best and fairest and a 3-time All-Australian, but also there might be something else that's relevant in terms of either, family or particularly in the VFL and the AFL women's, where you've got players who are either studying or working, to be able to talk to that sort of stuff. And that's particularly been something that's been really enjoyable in the 5 years we've done AFLW, is you do so much research on these players and the information can be really challenging to find, which is where you sort of got to go from Google to then talking to club people and sometimes the players themselves to hear about their stories. But when Richmond played last year, they had a woman playing by the name of Courtney Wakefield, who has a farm past the Victoria-New South Wales border, past Mildura, and she was commuting down to play at Richmond and driving, 10, 11 hours, round trip just to get to training, but also had 3 kids. And there was pretty amazing stories of just what she'd sacrificed to play AFLW. So to shine a light on those things is really important. But again, you don't find those things unless you're prepared to do the research.
How do you think your commentary style has developed over time since the beginning?
That's a really good question. I think it gets refined as you start to get a better understanding of what makes you good at it, and what you, I guess, prioritize. And then there's an element to which I think who you're working with probably helps shape your style as well, both in terms of how you pick up hopefully good habits off the people you're working with, but also learn things that you want to then alter yourself in terms of how you're doing things. And then I think the other part that impacts your style is the environment you put in to work in. So, AFLW is and AFLW and VFL is a really good example. Is if there are times where you're calling by yourself as opposed to with someone else, then the dynamic of your day is totally changed. You've got a lot more work to do to get prepared, and you're going to have to do a lot more heavy lifting. So, how much energy you expend at certain times and the way you pace yourself can change and be impacted upon. But in terms of my style, I mean, the priority for me is accuracy. So where I'll review myself and critique myself after a call is if I've got players wrong, which happens. It happens to everybody, but being able to get that ideally as close to 100% as possible is a real guiding principle every time. So I think that I would rather be 100% accurate if that meant that my style is a little bit more watered down, for want of a better word, than if I am calling every 5th player who's touching the ball and trying to tell gags and be funny. And there's some good advice that I think just get not only in the media, but sort of in society. If you're not funny, don't try and be. So again, it's probably a little bit more back to what I'm looking for as a viewer is be accurate, tell me who's got it, and then and being able to really then nail the key moments of the game. And that's probably the other part is then, when an AFL or an AFLW game gets cut down to 6 minutes of highlights, you might have 60 to 90 seconds of key moments in there that you've had the call for. Being able to nail those moments is really important. Particularly, again, think about some of the greatest marks that have ever been taken, the greatest goals that have ever been kicked. Like, those things live forever. So it's a pretty big responsibility that in the moment you can hopefully flick the switch and nail it, because that's something that people are going to watch for the next century.
Yeah. Out of AFL or VFL rather, and football in general, or horse racing, or even something else, what has been your personal favourite sport to call?
Yeah, footy. Yeah, absolutely. Because again, it's the thing that I've grown up with and loved, and also calling footy there's so much going on. Like, you think about, there's no sport in the world like it, where you've got 36 players on the field. That's more than any other sport I can think of. On the biggest ground possible, 160 by 140 meters, the ball can move in any direction through different means, by hand, by foot, by tapping it on. And a lot happens. It's not a dull game of footy. There might be 10 goals kicked. It's a bit different to a dull 0-0 draw in soccer. Like, there's going to be moments. There's going to be action. So I think calling footy absolutely is on another level to all those other things. I mean, my involvement in racing is hosting coverages. So I don't have the responsibility of calling a race, but I have incredible admiration for people like Matt Hill and Greg Miles and Darren Flindell and the good race callers. And I truly believe Australia's got the best people calling horse racing anywhere in the world. You listen to it overseas and I don't think it holds a candle to what our guys do here. But, Matt Hill, for a typical Saturday meeting, if it's 9 races and there's 12 to 15 horses in every race, he's got to go and learn 120 odd horses, the jockeys, the trainer, the colours, and then he's got effectively 60 to 90 seconds every half an hour to nail. Like, it's pretty extraordinary. Whereas, we've got, typical game of footy, 44 players who you probably see on a regular basis wearing the same jumper, wearing the same number. Like, to memorise all that is a lot easier than what those guys do. So, I don't think that's something I'll ever be trying to have a crack at.
So we just touched on when you're in the moment and the big moment that you want to commentate and you want to call it well. Have you had any moments that you've been privileged to call and that were huge, I guess?
I think so. Well, by my standards, I think so. Like, the handful of AFL games I've been able to do so far, there's been some moments, and I think I've been lucky. The games I've called so far have all been pretty good contests. The first ever AFL game I did was an Essendon-Collingwood match on a Sunday afternoon a couple of years ago. Yeah. Collingwood were in the middle of a really good season, and Essendon were in finals contention at that stage. And that was a cracking game of footy, and it went right down to the wire. And I did have a sense, it was 10-6, a lot of people are watching. And there's a lot hinging on it. And, there was a couple of goals in that last quarter that got kicked that won Collingwood the game that, I feel like, even if you sort of went back and watched it now, I'm really happy with how that came out.
Yeah.
And then AFLW, I mean, it's building its own history at the moment. So to have been part of that journey so far is also, something I feel really privileged to have done. And, the first night of AFLW, we didn't know what we were in for in terms of crowd and the standard of the game and all those sorts of things. And it was like a rock concert. So the atmosphere was there, and that almost does the job for you a lot of the time. That's the soundtrack of the sport, the crowd noise and the oohs and ahs, and it had all of that. But it also then meant that, well, if a goal got kicked, it was probably that first goal that player's ever kicked for Carlton or Collingwood. So that was significant. And they were trying to win the first ever game. So the reaction to that was very much amplified. And there was a couple of goals in that game that I was lucky enough to call, particularly in the first quarter, which look back on and pretty pretty privileged. And again, that's going to be something that's part of the history of that competition for decades to come.
And I think that's what the commentators this year have, well, that's been the struggle for them. The crowd noise is not there and the enthusiasm's kind of taken out there. So they have to paint the picture even more. And I feel like that'd be a big challenge for them. Did you or do you take voice lessons for clarity, diction, or anything else just to enhance your commentary?
Should I?
Nah, I think it's fine so far.
No, I haven't. No, I have thought about it, and it's probably something I would consider. Different guys do different things for their voice, depending on, as mine goes on me now, would you believe? But it is something you have to protect and look after, because it is a bit of an instrument, I suppose, when you think about it. So, during the season when coughs and colds and those sorts of things are around, if you've had to do a couple of games in a weekend, might be reaching for teas, and pineapple juice is a pretty popular one amongst the commentary fraternity. For some reason, they think it helps the vocal cords. So I don't know if that's accurate or not. But no, I haven't had any training, but it is something that I'll probably look at as time goes on. But yeah, I think it's sort of, you can't really do much, I don't think, to change your voice. It seems to be, again, one of those things that you sort of, it's handed to you, and then I don't know whether mine's changed a bit from a few whacks in the nose playing footy over the years, maybe. Whether the airflow that gets through there is a little bit different, but yeah, it's probably not something you can do too much to alter. You just got to try and look after it.
We'll move to the more comedic side of things. Have there been any comedic moments when you're in the box?
Yeah, well, 5 years of working with Campbell Brown, you can absolutely tick off that there is. So, yeah, VFLs, we've had a pretty amazing time of it. Myself, Campbell, who I knew before we did VFL together, and Jason Bennett, and the three of us have formed a really, really good triangle, I suppose, and we try and have a lot of fun. And VFL, again, is one of those things that the footy's really good, but also it is more of a local sort of style of game. So you've got to celebrate that. So yeah, from things like, think of some of the things that have happened over the years with, we had footage of a kid who was about 4 years old eating a donut covered in tomato sauce one time down in Geelong. That was pretty funny. And that's just something that, a cameraman, somehow they're amazing what they can find in the crowd. They zoom in on that. Next thing, ball's gone out of bounds, and there's a shot on our monitor of a kid with a donut in his hand and like the sauce thing. And you just have to react to it. Yeah. So, yeah, things like that. And then in 2015, the first year of the VFL on 7, Essendon were making a run in the finals, and we noticed a couple of guys in their cheer squad were coming to the game in Essendon pajamas. So we had the idea before the preliminary final to send Campbell into the Jamie Army with a pair of the Essendon flannelette pajamas on. So that was pretty funny, and it helps that he's up for doing whatever, and he's pretty happy-go-lucky sort of character. So yeah, we had a day at Box Hill in 2018 where it was a very typical August sort of wintry day in Melbourne, where there was basically these fronts of weather coming every sort of half an hour, and they'd put us in a scaffold on the outer side of the ground so they could shoot back towards the grandstand. So we had virtually no cover apart from like a pop-up tent, effectively. But there was like 50-kilometre-an-hour winds blowing through. So a couple of our crew were trying to sort of hold the tent down, and we were getting absolutely blown to smithereens. And there's some really, it's funny footage to look back on now, but we were sort of hands on papers and trying to cover our equipment with jackets so it didn't sort of get electrocuted and all those sorts of things. So yeah, it's been a pretty funny few years, and we have a few laughs, and I think that makes it more enjoyable for people at home as well.
I can't imagine the combination of tomato sauce and a donut would go well together though, but that's just me.
No, yeah, neither can I.
Do you have any ambitions for the future with commentating or even hosting?
Yeah, I do. Just to do as much as I can and do it as well as I can. That's probably the simple brief. Again, like a lot of people, COVID's taken a few things off the table this year, or perhaps just postponed them. So we had a shortened AFLW season. We didn't have a VFL season. So hopefully, again, those things are going to return in 2021. And I was down to work on the coverage of the Tokyo Olympics for Seven as well, which was going to be based here out of the big broadcast compound at Dockland. So again, hopefully the Olympics is something that's going to go ahead despite the issues with COVID. And thankfully it's still, I guess, 10 months away or so, but they seem pretty confident they're going to get an Olympics up. So hopefully I'll get a chance to be a part of that, because I think the Olympics is perhaps the pinnacle when it comes to television and sport, and it's an event that captures, Australia's hearts and minds for 3 weeks, but also globally as well. So, the Olympics would be a really unique one to work on, given it's going to be effectively the first global event where everyone comes together again for the first time after the pandemic. So hopefully that'll take place. And with racing.com, I'm getting some great opportunities, which I'm looking forward to continuing to grow. And being on the race course on a day of a big Group 1 meeting is a real buzz. And then again, to be given the responsibility of trying to bring that passion and excitement into the homes of people as well is pretty cool.
As I mentioned in the intro, you're a player manager in the TLA worldwide industry. Was this year stressful for you, or has there been years in the past that have been when free agency and the trade period come about?
Yep. In short, it's been really stressful. So I'm talking to you from my bedroom, which has also been my office. It'll be 8 months tomorrow since I've been working from home. We got sent home from our office at lunchtime on Monday, the 16th of March, which was the week before the AFL season started. And that was when, looked like coronavirus was starting to kind of take a bit of a foothold here in Melbourne. So, it's been pretty stressful. I mean, the first part was we didn't know if we were going to have a footy season. So that was a lot to digest. And then there was a lot of uncertainty for our players amongst that. They got asked to take a 30% pay cut, which a lot of people in the industry have lost their jobs, that they're not going to come back. So that was a sacrifice, but it was a necessary one given what was going on in the sport. There was a lot of work in the time between round 1 and then the resumption of the season, just checking in on guys, and a lot of uncertainty around what was going to happen. And then players sacrificed a lot this year with 100+ days in hubs and all that. And again, like, people think, well, can't have been too bad having 18 weeks in a hotel in Queensland, but it was pretty hard for them being away from family and friends, despite the fact it was 25 degrees every day. So it was pretty remarkable what they did, and just very proud that we got a season away. But then you layer that on the normal pressures in our job in terms of negotiating contracts for players and sourcing commercial opportunities for them, and trying to help them make the most of their careers off the field as well. It's been really difficult. And the personal side of our role, where you get to spend time one-on-one with people as well, just hasn't been there. Like this, there are clients of mine who I haven't seen in 7 months, and our contact's been this by Zoom and catching up that way, which has been a challenge. But again, it's something that every industry's had to adapt to this year, and just kind of embrace it and get on with it and make the best of it, which footy's done a pretty remarkable job in that sense.
I just want to give you a big thank you for giving me your time today before our last question. Off the back of a stressful week, considering the trade period and free agency, as we just mentioned, the final question: what would your advice be for a passionate, optimistic person like me obtaining experience in the media industry?
Go and volunteer and do as much as you can, unpaid, regardless of what it is. Like, if there's community radio, or it's a local footy club who are streaming their own games, or whatever sport it is, going and doing whatever it is to learn that industry and the business from the ground up is the best way to go about it. A lot of people, I think, make the mistake at times of thinking, well, I just want to get in at the top end, and I want to start I want to start as a commentator, and I want to start on television, and they're not prepared to climb the ladder and play the long game. And I think that's a mistake. So as I said, learning things from the absolute grassroots, I think, is really important. And it also allows you to make mistakes, and they're smaller mistakes. If there's less people watching or listening, or there's less importance put around the broadcast in terms of, what's behind it commercially, regards to sponsors or, working for a publicly listed company. It's just easier. So yeah, you can go and cut your teeth off Broadway, as they say, and learn it that way, and also decide whether you think it is for you or not. Because a lot of people go and do it and go, you know what, actually, this is too hard. I want to go and do something else, and that's perfectly fine. But I think the best way to go about it is, going and being prepared to be that person who says, all right, well, if my job on the broadcast is working off air and no one's ever going to hear me speak, but I'm going to provide information for the people that are talking or whatever it might be, that's a great way to learn, and learn by observing and listening rather than doing. I think's a great way to go about it.
Well, thank you for joining me today. This advice and just the overall experience of interviewing has been great for me, and I hope the viewers enjoyed it. I'll wrap it up here, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Dylan.